The door creaked open, and I braced myself for the stale rot of a house long forgotten, the sour breath of mold and dust. Instead, the air met me clean, sharp with lemon oil and faintly warm with the scent of coffee. My heart thumped once, hard. This wasn't how abandoned houses smelled. This wasn't how they looked either. The floorboards gleamed faintly, polished with care. A knitted throw was folded neatly over the arm of the sofa, corners tucked in with military precision. A mug sat on the counter in the adjoining kitchen, a faint ring of coffee drying at the bottom, no more than an hour old. Every muscle along my back tightened. I swallowed against the silence, but it wasn't silence at all. It was the kind of quiet you feel when you know you're not alone. Hello? My voice sounded too thin, landing flat in the air. No echo, no answer. I scanned the living room, bookshelves lined with mysteries and worn romances, their spines cracked from reading. A flat-screen TV above a stone fireplace that had been scrubbed recently, the glass doors gleaming. This wasn't a skeleton house. This was someone's home. My pulse tripped faster. I should have turned back, should have stepped outside and dialed 911 from the porch, but instead my feet carried me deeper. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the kitchen floor. I froze, every instinct shrieking. The footsteps paused, and in the pause, a sound threaded through the air, a low humming, steady, unhurried. A tune carried without fear. My hand drifted to the mantel, and my fingers closed around the edge of a framed photograph. My chest squeezed as I lifted it. My father stood there, younger than I had seen him in years, one arm slung around the shoulders of a woman with silver hair and eyes like a summer sky. His smile was lighter, freer, as if some invisible weight had slipped from him in that moment. My stomach dropped. The footsteps resumed. I slipped the photo into my tote before I could stop myself, before I could decide if that was cruel or desperate. My legs carried me forward, heart jackhammering as I reached the kitchen doorway. She stood there at the sink, sleeves rolled to her elbows, rinsing out a coffee pot. Her hair, short and silver, caught the light, and she hummed like the world belonged to her. She turned when she sensed me, and her eyes, those sharp, sky-colored eyes, locked on mine. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The silence pulsed between us, heavy, knowing. "You must be Emily," she said finally, drying her hands on a towel embroidered with tiny ducks. Her voice carried neither apology nor fear. It was calm, matter-of-fact, as though she had been expecting me. I gripped the doorframe to keep my knees steady. "And you are?" She folded the towel neatly, hanging it back in place. Nora Wells, your father told me you'd come today." The lawyer stacked his papers neatly, like that was the end of it, like he hadn't just sliced open the remainder of my life with a single sentence. I pressed my hands harder into my lap, the bones of my knuckles showing white. My father was gone. That reality should have been enough to keep me quiet, to remind me of the love I had given him in the last years, the nights I'd sat by his bedside with soup and pills and silence, when the pain took away words. But all I could think about now was that my sister had walked away with a mansion, and I had inherited what everyone in town laughed about when they drove past. On the elevator ride down, Paige let her victory hang in the air. She adjusted the strap of her bag so it caught the light like a piece of jewelry. "Well," she said with mock sympathy, "I suppose the market knows who did the real work." The words stabbed sharp, but I stayed silent. I had long ago learned that arguing with Paige was like trying to fight smoke. You swung until you were exhausted, and all you came away with was the ache of your own wasted energy. She thrived on conflict, on being right, on winning. I thrived on survival. And survival, in that moment, meant swallowing back my pride. When we reached the street, the autumn air stung my lungs. She walked off toward her car, the shiny new one Dad had co-signed a loan for before I could stop him. I stood there a moment longer, trying to decide if what I felt was grief or fury or both. My father, in his last days, had leaned heavily on me. I'd been the one to clean his kitchen, to hold his arm when he shuffled from the bedroom to the living room, to change his bandages, to handle his bills when the writing on the checks grew shaky. But Paige had the paperwork, the polished words, the influence she always had. I drove out to the farmhouse the same day, not because I wanted to, but because the thought of it gnawed at me. My old sedan rattled along the highway, the check engine light glaring like a reminder of my failures. The farther I drove, the thinner the houses grew, until only stretches of field and trees flanked the cracked road. Hawthorne Road appeared suddenly, a crooked sign half swallowed by weeds. My hands tightened on the wheel. The house sat hunched beneath the weight of its own history. Shingles curled like peeling bark. The porch sagged, as though it had been leaning on someone who'd stopped showing up. The paint was more gray than white, the color of neglect. For a long moment, I just sat in the car, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, and stared at it. This was my inheritance, my reward for years of service. I killed the ignition, the silence loud after the coughing hum of the car. The key the lawyer had pressed into my hand felt cold and heavy in my pocket. When I finally forced myself out of the car, the gravel crunched under my shoes like brittle bones. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. At the door, I hesitated. The lock turned smoothly, not like something abandoned. The brass didn't resist me. It clicked open with a polished ease that made the hair rise on my arms. Someone had oiled it recently. My breath stuttered. I pushed the door open. The door creaked open, and I braced myself for the stale rot of a house long forgotten, the sour breath of mold and dust. Instead, the air met me clean, sharp with lemon oil and faintly warm with the scent of coffee. My heart thumped once, hard. This wasn't how abandoned houses smelled. This wasn't how they looked either. The floorboards gleamed faintly, polished with care. A knitted throw was folded neatly over the arm of the sofa, corners tucked in with military precision. A mug sat on the counter in the adjoining kitchen, a faint ring of coffee drying at the bottom, no more than an hour old. Every muscle along my back tightened. I swallowed against the silence, but it wasn't silence at all. It was the kind of quiet you feel when you know you're not alone. "Hello?" My voice sounded too thin, landing flat in the air. No echo. No answer. I scanned the living room, bookshelves lined with mysteries and worn romances, their spines cracked from reading. A flat-screen TV above a stone fireplace that had been scrubbed recently, the glass doors gleaming. This wasn't a skeleton house. This was someone's home. My pulse tripped faster. I should have turned back, should have stepped outside and dialed 911 from the porch. But instead, my feet carried me deeper. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the kitchen floor. I froze, every instinct shrieking. The footsteps paused, and in the pause, a sound threaded through the air, a low humming, steady, unhurried. A tune carried without fear. My hand drifted to the mantel, and my fingers closed around the edge of a framed photograph. My chest squeezed as I lifted it. My father stood there, younger than I had seen him in years, one arm slung around the shoulders of a woman with silver hair and eyes like a summer sky. His smile was lighter, freer, as if some invisible weight had slipped from him in that moment. My stomach dropped. The footsteps resumed. I slipped the photo into my tote before I could stop myself, before I could decide if that was cruel or desperate. My legs carried me forward, heart jackhammering as I reached the kitchen doorway. She stood there at the sink, sleeves rolled to her elbows, rinsing out a coffee pot. Her hair, short and silver, caught the light, and she hummed like the world belonged to her. She turned when she sensed me, and her eyes, those sharp sky-colored eyes, locked on mine. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The silence pulsed between us, heavy, knowing. "You must be Emily," she said finally, drying her hands on a towel embroidered with tiny ducks. Her voice carried neither apology nor fear. It was calm, matter-of-fact, as though she had been expecting me. I gripped the doorframe to keep my knees steady. "And you are?" She folded the towel neatly, hanging it back in place. Nora Wells, your father told me you'd come today." Her words slid into me like a blade I hadn't seen coming. My fingers dug into the wood of the doorframe until it creaked, he told you," I repeated, my voice thinner than I wanted. "Yes." She straightened the towel, aligning it perfectly on the rack before turning back to me. "He knew you'd be here, sooner or later." I stepped into the kitchen, each board under my feet whispering against the weight of my uncertainty. "You're living in my house," I said, the words sharp, too sharp, but I couldn't sand them down. Nora didn't flinch. She simply nodded, as though I'd stated the weather. "The property is yours, yes. But the house," she trailed off, her eyes flicking toward the drawer by her hip. With the quiet patience of someone who had rehearsed this moment, she pulled it open, drew out a thick manila folder, and laid it on the table like an offering. My throat tightened. "What's that?" "Proof," she said softly. "Your father placed the house in a living trust 3 years ago. The trust belongs to me." The words thudded in my ears, foreign and wrong. "You're telling me I inherited the dirt, but not the building?" Essentially. I stood very still, afraid that if I moved, I might shatter. Heat climbed my neck, shame and fury wrestling in my chest. For years I had poured myself into his care. Nights without sleep, mornings without paychecks, friends lost, jobs abandoned. Paige had breezed in for birthdays and photo ops, but I had been there, always there. And now some stranger, no, not stranger, I realized with a sick drop in my stomach, companion, was claiming the one thing left to tether me to him. Why? I managed, though it came out more plea than demand. Her eyes softened, and she set the folder aside. Because he trusted me to keep this place alive when he couldn't. I cared for him here, Emily. For years. I cared for this house when it was falling apart. And when you were with him in town, I stepped back. I wasn't here to take from you. I was here because he asked me to be. My breath caught, stuttered, turned into something jagged. My tongue wanted to spit accusations, but what spilled instead was smaller, rawer. "I'm so tired," I whispered. The admission surprised me. It wasn't what I meant to say, but it was the only truth that would come. My hands remembered the feel of his walker, the slow lift of soup to his lips, the way I had sat through nights waiting for the sound of his shallow breathing to catch again. All those hours, and now this. Nora moved carefully, no sudden gestures, and slid a steaming mug toward me. "Sit, drink." Her tone carried no pity, only steadiness. I sank into the chair because my legs couldn't bear me anymore. The coffee was strong, deliberate. It grounded me, if only for a moment. When I set it down, she opened the folder again and drew out 2 envelopes, thick and heavy. My name was written on one in my father's neat, looping hand. Paige's name curled across the other. "He wrote letters," Nora said, her voice quiet but unshaken. "For both of you. He asked me to deliver them after the will." The envelope trembled in my hands, though I tried to hold it steady. His handwriting, careful and exact, pierced me with the force of memory. Shopping lists, sticky notes on the fridge, reminders written in the same looping script. My father's voice lived in these lines, even before I opened it. I slid a finger under the seal. The paper cracked softly, fragile as old bones. My chest constricted. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then the letter slid free, and his words rose to meet me. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, I am no longer able to say the things I should have told you long ago. I know the will felt unfair, and perhaps cruel. Please believe that what I did with the weight of many burdens you couldn't see." I swallowed hard, the page blurring. My father's voice was in every sentence, steady, practical, never flowery, but always carrying that quiet gravity he'd had when I was a child. When the medical bills mounted, when the house in town nearly slipped from my hands, I made decisions I could not explain at the time. The farmhouse, though it may seem worthless, is not. I placed it in Nora's trust so it would be protected, kept alive. But what it holds, that belongs to you. I needed someone who would not use it for greed. I needed someone I could trust. That someone is you, Emily, my pulse hammered. I read the lines again, slowly, as if repetition might change them. In 1991, while repairing the back closet floorboard, I found something buried beneath. It was not mine, nor yours, nor any family's, but it was powerful, dangerous in the wrong hands. I documented it carefully, stored it, and hid the evidence here. I kept it quiet to protect you and your sister from what money and hunger can do to people. But now, Emily, it is your decision. What you choose to do will shape more than you know." The words pressed into me like a weight. My throat went dry. My eyes flicked up to Nora, who stood silently, arms folded, watching me with that strange mix of calm and knowing. "What did he find?" My voice cracked. Nora tilted her head slightly. "He didn't tell me everything. Only that he trusted you to finish what he began. He wanted you to decide, Emily, not me. Not Paige. You." I turned back to the letter. The last lines cut through me. "You gave me more than care in my final years. You gave me dignity. Whatever happens, remember this. The farmhouse is not a curse. It is a key." I lowered the page slowly, my hands trembling. "A key? To what?" The silence in the room deepened, thick as smoke. Somewhere outside, a crow cried across the fields. The sound raw, ragged, like the world itself was warning me. The words clung to me, heavier than the coffee warming my palms. "The farmhouse is not a curse. It is a key." I kept hearing them, turning them over, trying to make them fit into some sense. But all I felt was the old ache of confusion and betrayal mixing with a sharp spark of something else. Curiosity. I pushed the letter flat on the table and looked at Nora. "Where?" My voice was low, but it carried. Her brows lifted slightly. "Where what? Where did he hide it?" My pulse was a drumline now. The thing he found. The reason for all of this. Nora hesitated, then glanced toward the hallway. "He mentioned the back bedroom. The closet, I think. But he wanted you to discover it yourself. Said you'd know." I stood so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. My legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the rush of urgency pressing through me. I carried the letter in one hand like it was fragile glass, and my other hand trailed along the wall as I moved down the hall. The farmhouse wasn't silent anymore. Every creak, every shift in the boards beneath my feet felt alive, as though the house itself was watching. The back bedroom smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The air was cooler, shaded by drawn curtains. A dresser leaned against the far wall, its varnish dull with age. But it was the closet that pulled me. The door was narrow, the handle worn smooth by years of hands. I opened it slowly, half expecting mothballs and disintegrating coats. Instead, I was met with his scent. Even after all this time, it lingered. Shaving cream, machine oil, a trace of cedar. My throat tightened. I pressed my face into the air and let myself breathe it in. It was like he was here, just out of reach. I dropped to my knees and pressed my fingers against the closet floor. The boards were uneven, old pine cut in rough lengths. My fingernail caught on a seam near the corner. Hard in my throat, I pried. The board lifted with surprising ease, as though it had been removed many times before. Beneath it lay a metal box, its tape yellowed and brittle. My breath came fast and shallow. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free and set it on the floor in front of me. The lid resisted for a moment, then gave with a creak. Inside, everything was arranged with precise care. Photographs, each labeled in my father's tidy script. A leather-bound journal, its edges worn soft from years of handling. Receipts for film, brushes, tarps, and beneath those, objects wrapped carefully in cloth. I pulled back the first fold, and my breath hitched. The photograph showed the earth split open, layers of soil peeled back to reveal patterns carved into stone. Spirals, lines, symbols that made my skin prickle with recognition, though I couldn't say why. I had seen things like this in museums, behind glass, explained with neat plaques. But this was here. This was ours. My father had found something old, something powerful, and now it was mine to decide what to do with it. I pulled the leather-bound journal from the box, the cover worn soft under my fingers. It smelled faintly of cedar and ink, the kind of scent that drags memory through your chest like a tide. The first page was dated 7 years ago, neat, careful handwriting filling every line. My father's voice echoed off the paper, steady and precise, even in ink. The site is authentic. No traces of modern disturbance. I have documented every artifact and every mark, mapping coordinates carefully. This must remain secret. To reveal it too soon would invite destruction, theft, or worse, familial ruin. I trust Emily to respect this when the time comes. I swallowed hard. My fingers traced the words. feeling them as though the paper could transmit meaning directly to my bones. He had left instructions for me alone. The next pages were photographs, diagrams, sketches of patterns in the dirt, notes on colors of stones, depths, measurements, and careful observations about each discovery. I recognized some shapes from books my son had obsessed over as a child: arrows, spirals, concentric circles. But this was real. Not glass cases, not museum lighting, not labels. Real, under my father's house. I turned the pages with reverent caution. Receipts for tarps, brushes, film rolls, even a small hand trowel carefully noted with the date purchased. He had prepared meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. It was as if he had known he wouldn't live to finish this project. A folded note slipped out from between the pages. My hands trembled as I opened it. It read, "Emily, if you are reading this, it is time. What you find here is not simply artifacts or history. It is the culmination of years of care, caution, and love. Do not rush. Observe, record, and respect. Protect it, as you have protected me in my final days." The weight of it pressed on me. This wasn't just a hidden cache. This was a test, a responsibility, a legacy. Outside, the wind tugged at the old farmhouse, rattling the window panes. The forest around the house seemed alive, whispering in a language I didn't understand. I felt eyes on me, though I knew I was alone. And yet, in that moment, I understood that the house had not been abandoned. It had been waiting for me. I glanced at Nora, still standing silently at the doorway, her blue eyes unblinking. She did not intrude, did not comment. She simply waited, a guardian of secrets I had yet to fully grasp. I turned my attention back to the journal. Each page was a breadcrumb trail, leading me deeper into my father's mind and the mystery he had discovered years before. It was meticulous, careful, loving in its detail, and it was mine to follow. My heart raced, a mixture of fear and anticipation. This farmhouse, which everyone in town laughed at, which Paige had sneered at when she inherited her mansion, was more than walls and weathered wood. It was a vessel of truth, a shelter for secrets, a bridge to a legacy I hadn't yet understood. And as I lifted the next page, the words caught me like a spark to dry kindling. The final location is hidden, beneath what was once the back wall of the main closet. Here lies the heart of it all. Only you may decide what to do next. Do not be hasty. Do not be careless. And remember, Emily, some truths are heavier than they seem. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the tremor of adrenaline and wonder. My father had left me more than a house. He had left me a path, a challenge, and a trust, heavier than any inheritance I could have imagined. I rose from the floor, the journal clutched to my chest, and took a deep breath that trembled with anticipation. The closet, the back wall, the place he had marked in his careful notes. Every instinct in me screamed caution, yet my curiosity overpowered hesitation. I stepped toward the back of the bedroom, each footstep deliberate, reverent. The closet seemed smaller now, ordinary at first glance, but I knew the truth lingered beneath the layers of dust and shadow. I knelt again, hands tracing the edges of the floorboards. My father's journal had prepared me for this moment. I remembered the page where he had noted the final location, the careful sketches of measurements and angles, the faint pencil marks on the photographs that lined the pages. Fingernail catching the corner of a board, I pried gently. The plank shifted just as he had described, lifting to reveal a cavity carved into the subfloor. My breath caught in my throat. Inside lay a small, sturdy metal box, taped and labeled with his neat, unmistakable handwriting. The yellowed tape betrayed its age, but not its importance. With trembling hands, I lifted it from its hiding place and set it on the floor. The box felt weighty, almost alive, humming with the energy of secrecy. My fingers shook as I removed the tape, revealing a lock that had been carefully oiled and maintained. I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside, the contents were laid out with meticulous care. Photographs of the site, labeled in chronological order, small bundles of artifacts wrapped in cloth, delicate and ancient, each piece catalogued with the precision of a scholar. Receipts, notes, and diagrams were scattered across the bottom of the box, each item a testament to my father's obsession and caution. But it was the journal he had left alongside the artifacts that drew my attention next. Tucked between the bundles of cloth, a folded sheet of paper bore his careful, looping handwriting. Emily. The patterns you see in these photos match symbols you have encountered before, perhaps without realizing their significance. These are not mere curiosities. They are markers, keys to understanding what lies beneath. Treat them with care. Your discovery is not just history, it is responsibility. My pulse pounded as I turned the pages, absorbing each note, each sketch, each careful observation. He had documented every aspect of the site with precision. Measurements, depths, colors, even the orientation of shadows at certain times of day. It was a map, a guide, a key to uncovering something extraordinary. I set the journal down for a moment and lifted one of the cloth bundles. Inside, I found small, intricately carved pieces of stone and bone, their surfaces etched with spirals and lines that matched the sketches. My fingers traced the patterns, feeling the grooves and ridges, connecting me to the man who had left them and the world he had uncovered. Nora's presence at the doorway was quiet, almost ceremonial, as though she understood that this moment belonged entirely to me. "He trusted you," she said softly, her voice a tether to the reality around me. "He wanted you to choose how to proceed. No one else." I nodded, my throat tight. The weight of the discovery pressed against me, a mixture of fear, awe, and determination. This farmhouse, so long dismissed by the world, held more than walls and dust. It held a legacy, a secret my father had protected with his life, and now, the choice to honor it, or ignore it, was mine. I carefully returned the artifacts to the box, leaving them undisturbed but within reach. My eyes scanned the closet one more time, lingering on the spot where the floorboard had lifted. Beneath it, the dark cavity seemed to pulse with potential, as if inviting me to dig deeper, to follow the path my father had laid out so meticulously. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sound that might have been a warning, or a promise. The farmhouse was no longer empty. It was alive with the secrets it had held for decades, and I was the one entrusted to uncover them. The first step had been taken, but I knew with the certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was only the beginning. I sat cross-legged on the floor of the closet, the journal open across my knees, every line of his handwriting a lifeline to a past I thought I knew. The instructions were precise, almost obsessive in their detail. He had mapped the positions of every board, measured the depths of the floor beneath the closet, and even recorded subtle differences in the wood grain. It was as if he had anticipated my arrival, anticipated the moment I would step into his carefully constructed labyrinth. With a deep, steadying breath, I began. My fingers traced the edges of each floorboard, following his notations. Each lift of a plank revealed a new compartment, a new hidden space meticulously crafted to store something precious. I found small metal boxes, each with carefully labeled contents, fragments of pottery, tiny carved stones, and papers documenting their origins. My heart pounded with every discovery. I paused at one section where the floor met the wall. According to the journal, there should have been another cavity here. My fingers probed the seam, pressing against what felt like a hollow edge. With a soft push, the wall panel shifted slightly. My breath caught. I had found another hidden compartment. Inside, there were more photographs, but these were different. Older, worn, edges frayed, depicting scenes I didn't recognize immediately. Symbols etched into the ground, arrangements of stones and spirals and lines that seemed to tell a story, though I couldn't yet decipher it. Beneath them, a small envelope bore my father's handwriting. "Emily, you are doing exactly what is needed. Trust your instincts. The next step requires patience and observation. What you uncover here may challenge what you thought you knew about our family and the world around you." My hands shook as I lifted the envelope. I had expected mundane items, perhaps letters or receipts, but this felt alive, urgent. It was as though my father's presence lingered, guiding me, pushing me to understand not just the objects, but the intention behind them. I turned to look at Nora, who had remained silently near the doorway, her expression unreadable. He really wanted me to do this," I whispered. Nora nodded slowly. "He trusted you to continue what he began. no one else. He wanted you to see the truth for yourself, Emily. The weight of responsibility settled over me. The farmhouse, which had seemed like a forgotten relic of a past era, was actually a vessel of secrets, a guardian of knowledge and legacy. My father had built this hidden world carefully, layer by layer, and now it was mine to explore. I opened the envelope inside the compartment. Inside were more photographs, sketches, and notes. But one item made my pulse seize: a tiny metal key, cold and heavy in my palm. Attached was a small slip of paper. Emily, this unlocks the next stage. Use it wisely. The house holds more than walls. It holds guidance, history, and truth. Trust yourself. I stared at the key, feeling the weight of everything my father had left behind. It wasn't just the objects. It was the trust, the care, the foresight. Paige had walked away with a mansion, wealth, and status. But I had been entrusted with something far more valuable. Something hidden, sacred, and alive. My mind raced. What was the next stage? What did the key unlock? And most importantly, was I ready for the truths my father had protected? Truths that could unravel everything I thought I knew about our family and the world hidden in plain sight beneath this farmhouse. The shadows in the closet seemed to deepen, as if the house itself were leaning closer, watching, waiting for my next move. I clenched the key tightly, a tether to the legacy I had just begun to uncover. This was no longer a crumbling house. It was the gateway to my father's final unspoken plans. And I was standing at the threshold. I sat back on my heels, the metal key cold and heavy in my palm. The closet felt smaller, closer, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, holding their breath with me. Every fiber of my being screamed to stop, to step away, to leave this house and its secrets behind. But I couldn't. Not now. My father's trust, his careful planning, and the weight of years of care I had given him pressed me forward. The farmhouse was alive in a way I had never imagined. The soft hum of the wind through the pines outside mingled with the subtle creaks of the floorboards beneath me, forming a rhythm that seemed to guide my heartbeat. It was a language I had only begun to understand, a silent conversation between the house and me, between the past and the present. I placed the key gently on top of the journal and ran my fingers over the cover, feeling the impressions of his careful handwriting. My father had thought of everything: the floors, the walls, the hidden compartments, the notes, the maps. Each item was a breadcrumb leading me deeper into a mystery I wasn't yet ready to comprehend. But the journal, the photographs, and now this key were invitations. Invitations to step fully into the world he had protected, the world he had trusted me to inherit. Nora remained at the doorway, her presence quiet but steady. "He left you more than a house, Emily," she said softly, her eyes not leaving mine. "He left you purpose, and he left you a choice. How you proceed is entirely up to you. But be careful. Some secrets are heavier than you expect." I nodded, though the weight of her words sank into my chest like stones. What could be heavier than a lifetime of secrets? What could be more dangerous than truths buried beneath decades of silence? And yet, despite the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind, a spark of determination lit within me. I had cared for my father, protected him, tended to him when others would not. I could handle this. I would handle this. I stood slowly, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and glanced once more around the closet. The compartments were emptying into my memory now, the floorboards, the boxes, the journal, the photographs. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, and for the first time in days I felt a sense of purpose, a tether to something larger than grief, larger than loss, larger than the petty divisions that had separated me from Paige. The metal key caught the light in my hand, a tiny, unassuming object that promised the next step. I slipped it into my pocket and exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the pines, carrying a faint hint of rain. The farmhouse seemed to sigh with me, as though acknowledging the moment, acknowledging the choice I was about to make. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, hidden in the closet, reading notes and handling relics. There was more to uncover. There was a next stage, and most of all, there was a story my father had begun but never finished, a story he had entrusted to me alone. I walked out of the closet, heart pounding, senses alert. The farmhouse seemed alive now, aware of my presence. aware of the path I had begun to follow. Every step carried weight, every creak of the floorboard a warning, every whisper of the wind a hint. I reached the main room and paused, looking around. This house, this inheritance, was far from crumbling. It was waiting for me to unlock its final secrets. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach twist, that nothing in my life would ever be the same. Not my sister, not the farmhouse, not even me. With the key in my hand and the journal tucked under my arm, I stepped toward the front door, knowing that what awaited outside, the world, the next step, the choices I had yet to make, was only the beginning. The farmhouse had secrets, and I had the key, and the story was just starting. The wind pressed against the windows of the farmhouse as I stepped back into the main room, the journal tucked under my arm, and the metal key clutched tightly in my hand. My mind raced, filled with images of the compartments I had just uncovered, the photographs, the artifacts, and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of purpose my father had left behind. The farmhouse was no longer a relic of neglect or a crumbling inheritance. It was a map to something deeper, a puzzle waiting for me to unravel, and I could feel it thrumming beneath the boards, through the walls, in the very air of the house. I paused at the living room doorway, glancing out toward the lake through the tall, pine-framed windows. The water gleamed gray under the overcast sky, rippling with a strange light that seemed almost deliberate, as if the lake itself were calling me, urging me forward. I spent the next few hours retracing my father's meticulous notes, flipping through the journal over and over, memorizing measurements, symbols, and sketches. Each page offered new insight. A corner of the closet floor labeled with subtle marks, a photograph with arrows drawn in faint pencil, the angles of shadows at different hours of the day, and coordinates that led to a point in the yard just beyond the house. It was exhausting, but I could not stop. The energy in the farmhouse was alive, pressing against my thoughts, pushing me, whispering that the next step was near. By late afternoon, I found myself standing near the edge of the property, the journal in one hand and the metal key in the other, staring at the corner of the garden my father had always tended, the one overlooked by neighbors and overshadowed by pine trees. The grass here seemed slightly depressed, uneven, as if something heavy had once rested upon it. Following the instructions, I began to dig in that small hidden corner. My hands quickly coated in dirt, sweat running down my temples. The journal had warned me that the soil was soft and that any sudden movements could damage what lay beneath. And I worked with painstaking care, scraping and brushing as if each handful of earth were a delicate treasure. Hours passed, the wind whipping across the lake, the water shimmering with a light that shifted with every cloud. My muscles ached, my palms were raw, but the excitement and tension surged through me, keeping my fatigue at bay. Then finally, my trowel struck something solid, a wooden crate buried just beneath the surface, nearly camouflaged by moss and soil. My heart pounded as I brushed away the remaining dirt, exposing the metal reinforcements at the corners. This was it, the next stage my father had promised. I pried the lid open carefully, and my breath caught. Inside lay objects unlike anything I had ever seen. Intricately carved stones, shards of pottery embedded with tiny symbols, and bundles of meticulously wrapped artifacts. Each piece bore the marks of ancient craftsmanship, and I realized that these were not merely remnants of history. They were keys to understanding something vast and secret. My father's handwriting on small tags next to each object guided me, explaining what each piece was, how it connected to the others, and what to do next. I felt a shiver of reverence. He had trusted me with a legacy that went far beyond the walls of the farmhouse. This was knowledge, responsibility, and mystery wrapped into one, and I understood that it could alter not only my understanding of our family, but of history itself. Hours turned into twilight, and I carried each artifact into the house, setting them carefully on a table and comparing them with the sketches and notes in the journal. The patterns in the stones mirrored the spirals in the photographs from the hidden compartments, and I began to see a sequence, a code, a story that had been left for me to decipher. Every symbol, every mark, every diagram connected to the land beneath my feet, the lake behind the house, and even the small details my father had noted years ago in other corners of the property. It was as if he had created a trail for me, each clue designed to draw me closer to a truth that only patience and careful observation could reveal. Night fell, and the lake reflected the moonlight in a way that seemed almost purposeful, glimmering across the surface like a silver thread leading somewhere unknown. I worked by the soft light of a single lamp, my fingers tracing patterns on the artifacts, my mind absorbing the complexity of my father's system. Each page of the journal offered insight, but also new questions. He had left warnings, too. The artifacts must be treated with respect. They must never be removed from the farmhouse without care, and they must be preserved for the moment when the next stage would be revealed. My pulse quickened with every line I read, the combination of fear and exhilaration pressing against my ribs. By the time I finally set the journal down, exhaustion had taken hold, but sleep was impossible. I sat by the window, looking out at the lake and the dark pines that surrounded the farmhouse, feeling as though I could sense my father's presence in the stillness, guiding me, encouraging me to continue. I realized then that this journey was more than discovery. It was a test of my endurance, my insight, and my resolve. Paige could have all her mansions, all her wealth, all the visible rewards that had been handed to her. I had something infinitely rarer, a secret, a purpose, and a path that my father had entrusted only to me. I knew I could not stop here. The artifacts were only the beginning, and the journal hinted at deeper layers, hidden chambers, and connections that spanned not just the farmhouse, but the land itself. My father had left me a puzzle with pieces scattered across time and space, and each step I took brought me closer to understanding what he had discovered, what he had protected, and why it mattered so much. I turned the key over in my hand one last time before placing it on the table. Tomorrow, I would follow the next set of instructions, uncover the next compartment, and step further into a world my father had prepared for me alone. The farmhouse, the lake, the secrets beneath the soil. They were no longer passive remnants of the past. They were alive, waiting, demanding that I uncover their truth, and I was ready. The first light of morning filtered through the curtains, painting the farmhouse in soft amber tones. I sat at the table, the artifacts spread before me like a chaotic constellation, each piece demanding my attention. The metal key lay next to the journal, cold and weighty, a reminder that the next step was both literal and symbolic. My father's instructions were precise, yet they required more than just following measurements. They demanded observation, patience, and intuition. I had spent the night rereading the journal, tracing the faint pencil lines over and over until the patterns began to emerge, revealing connections I hadn't noticed before. Symbols on the stones mirrored sketches in the photographs. Certain spirals matched indentations in the floorboards. Everything pointed to one location, the edge of the lake, near a grove of pines that bent low over the water. By mid-morning, I dressed warmly, packed the journal and artifacts carefully into a sturdy bag, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and earth. The lake stretched out before me, its surface calm, reflecting the pale morning sky like glass. I followed the directions my father had drawn, walking slowly, measuring distances, noting angles. Every step felt significant. Every glance over my shoulder felt like the house itself was watching, waiting. When I reached the grove he had described, my pulse quickened. There, tucked under roots of a gnarled pine, I found a narrow depression in the soil, just as he had predicted. Kneeling, I cleared away the loose earth carefully. My hands brushed against something firm. Heart hammering, I dug deeper, revealing a small wooden box, reinforced with iron straps, and bearing my father's unmistakable handwriting on a tag, for Emily, the next stage. I lifted it, brushing off the soil, feeling the weight of both the box and the responsibility it represented. Inside, there was a folded map, yellowed and delicate, with notations in my father's precise hand. It depicted the surrounding land, the lake, and hidden markers I had never noticed before. Tree stumps, boulders, and faint lines suggesting subterranean tunnels or chambers. The map was more than geography. It was a puzzle, a trail he had laid for me to follow. My mind raced with questions. How deep did this go? What had my father discovered that required such secrecy? And why had he chosen me alone to continue his work? I could feel the weight of history pressing against me, a mix of fear, awe, and exhilaration. Each artifact, each photograph, each note was not just a relic. It was a key to understanding something immense, something beyond the walls of the farmhouse, beyond even the lake. Returning to the house, I spread the map across the table, comparing it to the journal, the artifacts, and the photographs. Patterns began to emerge, spirals that aligned with stones, markers that corresponded to trees, numbers that matched measurements I had taken in the closet and yard. My father had left me a trail, a method to uncover not just objects, but the story they told, the history they protected, and as I traced the lines, a chill ran down my spine. I realized that what I was uncovering could change everything I thought I knew about the land, our family, and the secrets hidden beneath this seemingly quiet farmhouse. Hours passed, the afternoon light shifting to gold, and then to soft gray as clouds rolled over the lake. I worked steadily, documenting, cross-referencing, and preparing for the next stage. Every step required focus. Every detail could hold the key to the next discovery. The house felt alive with expectation, the walls echoing my movements, the floorboards whispering faint warnings. Outside, the lake shimmered as if in response, a mirror of possibilities and danger. As evening fell, I paused to look around the farmhouse, the artifacts, the map, and the journal before me. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that this inheritance was far more than a house or even a collection of objects. It was a legacy, a responsibility, a story left for me to continue and protect. And somewhere beyond the edge of the lake, beyond the shadows of the pines, the next clue waited, ready to pull me deeper into the mystery my father had built with love, precision, and unwavering trust. I leaned back, my heart still racing, knowing one thing for certain. I had crossed the threshold. The farmhouse, the lake, the hidden chambers, the artifacts, and the secrets. They were all part of a journey that had only just begun. And I was ready to follow it, wherever it might lead, even if it demanded everything I had, and even more. The moon had risen high over the lake when I finally felt ready to follow the map to the first hidden chamber. I packed the journal, the artifacts, and the metal key into a worn satchel, my hands trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation. The lake was silver in the moonlight, waves lapping softly at the shore, whispering secrets I couldn't yet understand. I approached the grove of pines, following the map with meticulous care, each step precise, measured against the instructions my father had left. The shadows stretched long and jagged across the forest floor, and the air smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and something older, almost metallic, that made my skin prickle. Beneath the largest pine, I found the subtle indentation my father had marked. A stone slab, nearly camouflaged by moss and roots. My fingers traced the edges, feeling for seams, and pressed down. At first it resisted, but with steady pressure, the slab shifted, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough for me to crawl through. My heart pounded. The air that escaped smelled of earth, age, and something faintly sweet, like old wood polished with care. I lowered myself into the darkness, the cold pressing against my skin, the walls close enough to brush with my hands. The tunnel was narrow, barely more than a crawl space, and my movements were slow, deliberate. Each step sent echoes bouncing off the walls, a rhythm that seemed almost alive. I followed the faint markings my father had etched into the stone, arrows, spirals, small notations in chalk that guided my path. I realized that he had traveled this passage countless times, leaving behind signs only someone with his understanding would notice. The farther I moved, the stronger the sense became that the house itself was aware of my presence, almost protective, almost expectant. After what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes, the tunnel opened into a chamber larger than I had expected. The ceiling was low, the air cooler, and the walls lined with shelves and niches containing artifacts, stones, and objects that glimmered faintly in the pale moonlight, filtering from small cracks above. At the center of the room was a stone pedestal, upon which rested an ornate box, its surface etched with spirals and markings I recognized from the photographs in my father's journal. My hands shook as I approached it. The weight of discovery pressed down on me, and I realized that this was the heart of his secret. the culmination of years of research, protection, and careful planning. I reached out and touched the box, feeling its cold surface beneath my fingers. It was heavier than it looked, as if it carried the weight of generations. I lifted the lid slowly, holding my breath. Inside were more artifacts, but this time they were accompanied by notes and a small leather-bound journal in my father's handwriting, detailing not just the objects but their purpose, their significance, and warnings about their use. One note caught my attention immediately. "Emily, this is the beginning. The artifacts here are part of a system, a puzzle, and a history that must be preserved. Do not share it with anyone unprepared for the consequences. Each object is connected to the others, and each action you take will influence the outcome. Trust your instincts, trust your training, and above all, be careful." I felt a shiver run down my spine. This was no longer just a discovery. It was a responsibility that demanded vigilance, intelligence, and courage. I carefully examined the objects, comparing them with the sketches and notes I had found in the other compartments. Patterns emerged, codes became visible, and a faint trail of logic led me deeper into the mystery. The chamber seemed to breathe around me, alive with energy and purpose. I understood that my father had created this hidden world not only to protect the artifacts, but to guide the one he trusted most, me, through the process of uncovering their meaning. And as I set the journal down, carefully aligning it with the other pieces, I realized the enormity of what lay ahead. The tunnels, the chambers, the hidden compartments. They were all part of a path he had built, layer by layer, for me to follow. Outside, the lake reflected the moon like a sheet of silver, calm and inviting. But I knew better. Calm could be deceptive. The secrets I had uncovered so far were only the beginning, and the next stages promised challenges I had not yet imagined. And yet, despite fear pressing against my chest, a spark of determination ignited within me. I would follow the path, uncover the truth, and protect the legacy my father had entrusted to me alone. With the first chamber explored and the artifacts carefully catalogued, I pressed onward deeper into the tunnels. Every step, every shadow, every echo reinforced the realization that I had entered a world my father had hidden, not just from the outside, but from time itself. The farmhouse above me might have seemed ordinary, but beneath it lay a labyrinth of secrets, and I was now the one chosen to navigate it. I paused at the fork in the tunnel, studying the faint markings on the walls. The next path beckoned, whispering promises of discovery and danger alike. I tightened my grip on the journal and the metal key. My pulse quickened, and with a deep, steadying breath, I stepped forward into the darkness. The real journey, the one my father had prepared me for, had only just begun. The air grew colder the farther I ventured into the labyrinth beneath the farmhouse. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls lined with faint markings, spirals, and symbols my father had painstakingly etched years before. Each step sent small echoes bouncing off the stone and wood, a reminder that I was utterly alone, or so I thought. The map he had left, combined with his careful notes, guided me. Yet every twist and turn of the tunnel seemed to increase the tension in my chest. My pulse quickened as I descended deeper, the oppressive weight of the earth above pressing down on me in a way that made my muscles tense with both excitement and unease. I paused at a narrow passage that branched sharply to the left. According to my father's notes, this path led to the inner chamber, a place he had described as the heart of the discovery. I crawled carefully, hands brushing against the rough stone walls, the metal key in one hand and the journal in the other. My thoughts flickered to Paige, how she had inherited her mansion and all the ease of wealth while I dug through dirt and darkness, but I pushed it aside. My father had chosen me for this, trusted me, and I could not fail, not now. Not when the stakes were so high. Then I heard it, a subtle creak, almost imperceptible over the sound of my own movements. I froze, holding my breath. The tunnel seemed to respond to my pause, silence thick around me. Another creak followed, this time closer, as though someone, or something, was moving deliberately behind me. My mind raced. Could someone have followed me into the tunnels? Had Nora, or worse, Paige, somehow discovered the secret path? Fear clawed at me, but my father's words echoed in my mind. Trust your instincts. Trust your training. I swallowed hard and pressed onward, careful not to make unnecessary noise. The tunnel widened slightly, revealing an inner chamber built into the rock, its entrance almost invisible without the map. I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight illuminating artifacts, tools, and containers arranged with precise care. My fingers brushed over ancient pottery, delicate carvings, and bundles wrapped in cloth, each item cataloged in the notes I had painstakingly copied from previous discoveries. It was as if my father's presence lingered, a silent guide watching over me. But the sense of calm shattered when I noticed movement at the far end of the chamber. A shadow shifted, just beyond the edge of my flashlight's reach. My heart lurched. I gripped the metal key tightly, my fingers curling around it as if it could protect me. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing off the stone walls, trembling despite my attempt at steadiness. There was no answer, only silence, and the soft, deliberate rustle of something, or someone, moving closer. Instinct kicked in. I ducked behind a stone pedestal, holding my breath as the shadow moved along the chamber's edge. The air smelled faintly metallic, and a chill ran down my spine. Whoever, or whatever was here, had been expecting someone. I realized that the tunnels were not just a path to discovery. They were a trap, designed to test, to challenge, and perhaps even to eliminate those who were not prepared. I pressed my back to the cool stone, trying to remain invisible, my mind racing for a plan. Minutes stretched like hours. The shadow paused, then receded slowly, leaving only the echo of its movement behind. I exhaled silently, my body trembling with adrenaline and fear. This was more than I had anticipated. The tunnels were not just hiding artifacts, they were protecting them, and perhaps punishing those who ventured too far, too quickly. I knew then that every step forward would carry risk, and that the stakes were higher than I had imagined. But even fear could not stop me. I had come too far, discovered too much, and uncovered a legacy my father had entrusted only to me. I pressed on, guided by the map and the journal, my flashlight illuminating the next passage. Every shadow could be danger, every creak a threat, but I was determined. I would follow the path, confront whatever lay ahead, and uncover the truth that my father had protected so fiercely. As I moved deeper into the labyrinth, the tunnel narrowed again, and the air grew heavy with the scent of earth and old wood. The artifacts in the previous chamber had been only the beginning. Ahead lay something far greater, something my father had called the final stage of understanding. My pulse raced as I imagined what awaited. An artifact, a revelation, or perhaps a test that could change everything. And with every step, I felt the weight of his trust, the responsibility pressing down, urging me forward into the darkness. The tunnels were alive, the house above silent and waiting. And I was no longer merely exploring. I was stepping into the heart of a secret that could change my life forever. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the real danger and the real discovery had only just begun. The tunnel twisted and descended further than I had imagined, the air growing colder and heavier with every step. My flashlight beam trembled slightly in my hand as I traced the markings my father had left on the walls, faint spirals and arrows guiding me deeper into the labyrinth. Each symbol seemed to hum with intention, a quiet rhythm that resonated through my chest and made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The journal was open beside me, pages filled with his meticulous notes, sketches and warnings, yet even with his guidance, I could sense that the secrets I was about to uncover were far beyond anything I had anticipated. The farmhouse above seemed miles away, silent and still, as if the world had ended outside, and only I remained to walk this hidden path. I entered a larger chamber, wider than any tunnel so far, the walls lined with ancient stones that glimmered faintly in the pale beam of my flashlight. In the center, resting atop a stone pedestal, was an object wrapped carefully in dark cloth, its presence commanding the room. My pulse raced as I approached, reverence and fear coiling tightly in my chest. Carefully, I unwrapped it, revealing a small, intricately carved relic, unlike anything I had seen before. Its surface was etched with symbols that matched the spirals in my father's journal. Yet there was something else, something almost alive in the curves and angles of the carvings, as if it pulsed with hidden energy. Beneath the relic, a folded sheet of paper lay, penned in my father's looping, deliberate handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it, reading words that made my stomach tighten and my chest ache. He had documented a discovery, one so monumental that he had hidden it from everyone in the world. A series of artifacts connected not only to our land but to a network of ancient sites, hidden for centuries, each holding pieces of a story that had been deliberately erased from history. My father had been a guardian, preserving knowledge and protecting it from those who might exploit or destroy it. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. Our family's legacy, the farmhouse, even my father's quiet life had all been intertwined with this secret mission. A soft breeze brushed the back of my neck, though I knew the chamber had no natural openings. Goosebumps rose along my arms as I realized that my father had not left me a simple inheritance. He had left me a calling. The spirals, the tunnels, the artifacts, even the compartments in the farmhouse. They were all part of a system, a code, and a history that demanded to be understood. And now, it was my responsibility to continue what he had begun. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, a mix of fear, awe, and determination. This was bigger than money, bigger than property, bigger than anything Paige could ever understand. The journal instructed me to cross-reference the symbols on the relic with a set of coordinates marked on the map I had uncovered in the grove outside. It led to a location near the far edge of the lake, a place I had passed countless times without noticing any unusual features. My father had hidden his discoveries in plain sight, layered beneath familiarity, only accessible to someone who knew how to read the clues. The thought made my heart pound. Every step I took was a step into history, into a secret world that had existed in shadows for centuries. I carefully packed the relic back into its cloth, securing it in my bag with the journal and the metal key. The air in the chamber felt almost alive, vibrating faintly with energy I could not explain. Shadows stretched along the walls, flickering as my flashlight moved, and for a moment, I felt as though the past itself was watching me, gauging whether I was worthy of the trust my father had left behind. The realization was humbling, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. I climbed back through the narrow tunnels, each step measured and deliberate, the weight of the discovery heavy in my chest. When I finally emerged near the lake, the moonlight danced across the water, calm and reflective, hiding the secrets beneath its surface. I knelt by the shore, examining the map and aligning it with the coordinates my father had marked. Somewhere along this stretch of water, a hidden site waited, holding answers and perhaps dangers I could not yet anticipate. And I knew, with a mix of dread and anticipation, that the path my father had prepared for me was only beginning. This first revelation was just a taste of what lay ahead, a network of secrets spanning land, history, and generations, and I was the one entrusted to uncover them all. The farmhouse, the tunnels, the lake, the relics, they were part of a legacy my father had fought to protect. And now, it was my turn to continue the work, no matter the cost. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs, and stepped along the lake's edge toward the coordinates. The real journey had begun, and with every step, the weight of my father's trust pressed harder, urging me forward into mysteries that could change everything I thought I knew about my family, my home, and myself. The night was heavy with fog as I moved along the lake's edge, the map clutched tightly in my hands, and the relic secured in my bag. The coordinates my father had marked led me to a small hidden cove at the far end of the property, a place I had passed countless times without noticing anything unusual. The water lapped softly against the shore, almost whispering secrets, and the moonlight glimmered off the ripples in a way that seemed deliberate, like a guide. I crouched to examine the ground, and immediately noticed faint depressions in the soil, marks that could only have been made recently. My pulse quickened. Someone else had been here, someone who might have been watching me, following the same trail my father had laid. I traced the markings to a narrow slit in the rock face, partially hidden by moss and overhanging roots. The journal had warned that the inner chambers could be accessed from multiple points, and I realized that this was one of them. My flashlight illuminated the interior as I crawled inside, the air cool and musty, smelling of damp stone and old wood. The tunnel narrowed quickly, forcing me to squeeze through, and I felt the familiar thrill of discovery mixed with tension. I had been alone for so long, navigating the labyrinth my father had created. But now I sensed that I was not the only one here. Someone else had breached his secret, and the thought made my stomach churn. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of my light. I froze, heart pounding, every muscle taut. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice echoing unnaturally in the narrow space. There was no immediate answer, just the sound of movement, deliberate and careful. My instincts screamed at me to run, to retreat, but I reminded myself that this was what my father had prepared me for: challenges, obstacles, and tests. I gripped the metal key in one hand, the journal in the other, and took a slow step forward, determined not to show fear. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and lean, face partially obscured by a hood. I couldn't see much, but I could sense the intensity of their gaze, the deliberate quiet in their movements. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said, calm but edged with steel. I tensed, ready for confrontation. "I could say the same to you," I replied, keeping my voice steady. The figure shifted, eyes glinting in the beam of my flashlight. "Your father left this for someone he trusted. But you're reckless. You don't understand what you're touching." My heart raced. I had expected challenges, perhaps traps, but I hadn't anticipated someone else actively guarding my father's secrets. The figure stepped closer, their presence dominating the narrow tunnel. I took a deep breath, remembering the journal, the relic, the artifacts, and my father's careful instructions. This confrontation was part of the journey, part of the path he had prepared, and I would not falter. "I understand more than you think," I said, my voice firmer now. "And I intend to see this through." My father trusted me. That's enough. For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick and tense. Then the figure tilted their head, studying me, and for the first time, I saw recognition in their eyes. "So he did leave it to you," they murmured, almost to themselves. "I suppose you'll follow the path then. But beware, these secrets aren't just history. They're dangerous. They're alive in ways you haven't imagined." I felt a chill run down my spine. Alive. What could my father have discovered that carried such weight, such threat? The figure stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as suddenly as they had appeared. I exhaled slowly, my pulse racing and my hands trembling. The encounter had been brief, but its impact was profound. The tunnels were not just a map, not just a series of artifacts. They were a network of secrets, and others knew of them, others sought them, and some might stop at nothing to control them. My father had trusted me with a legacy that was both extraordinary and perilous. I pressed forward, heart pounding, the journal and relics clutched tightly. Every shadow seemed alive now, every sound amplified, every step weighted with the knowledge that I was not alone, and that danger was closer than I had realized. The tunnels had become more than a path to discovery. They were a test, a challenge, and a battlefield, all entwined. I realized that the next stages of my father's secret would demand not only intellect and patience, but courage, strategy, and perhaps even sacrifice. Emerging into the next chamber, I paused to steady my breathing. The artifacts lay undisturbed, the patterns on the stones and the relics aligning with my father's meticulous notes. But the confrontation had changed something fundamental. The journey was no longer solitary. Someone else had stakes in this secret, and I would have to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast them if I hoped to honor my father's trust and protect the legacy he had fought so hard to preserve. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than ever, and stepped further into the chamber, knowing that the real danger and the real discovery was still ahead. The chamber was dim, lit only by the faint glow of my flashlight, shadows stretching across the stone walls like dark fingers. I moved slowly, deliberately, tracing the lines of the carvings and artifacts with reverent hands. Every step echoed, bouncing through the labyrinth, reminding me of the solitude I had relied on until now. But solitude no longer felt safe. The encounter in the previous tunnel lingered in my mind like a shadow, a warning that I was not the only one walking the path my father had carved. Still, the sense of urgency pushed me forward. I had to uncover the truth, had to understand what my father had dedicated his life to protecting. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal unlike the others, taller, sturdier, and more imposing, as if it were designed to announce the importance of whatever rested upon it. My pulse quickened as I approached, the relics in my bag suddenly feeling both heavier and more fragile. On the pedestal lay an object wrapped in dark velvet, its shape unfamiliar yet undeniably powerful. I hesitated for a heartbeat, the weight of responsibility pressing against me. This was more than discovery. It was revelation. A glimpse into a world my father had shielded from everyone, even from those who claimed to care for him. Slowly, carefully, I removed the velvet covering, revealing a small crystalline artifact. It glimmered in the flashlight's beam, refracting light into colors that danced along the walls. Its surface was etched with symbols, spirals, and patterns that seemed to shift subtly as I moved, as though alive. The air around it felt charged, a faint hum vibrating through the chamber and into my bones. My breath caught. This was what my father had been protecting, what had driven him to secrecy and obsession, what had justified every hidden compartment, every coded note, every layer of protection he had built into the farmhouse and tunnels. I held the artifact in my hands, reverently tracing the delicate carvings. The journal provided context. This object was part of a network, an interconnected series of relics spanning ancient civilizations, each holding pieces of knowledge deliberately lost to history. My father had spent decades uncovering them, documenting their locations, and preserving them for someone he trusted to continue his work. And now, it was my responsibility. The artifact itself seemed to pulse with importance, a tangible connection to the past, to power, to secrets that could shift understanding in ways I could barely comprehend. As I examined it, I noticed a hidden compartment within the pedestal. Inside lay a series of old maps, bound with leather, annotated in my father's precise handwriting. Each map corresponded to a different artifact, a different site, a different secret waiting to be uncovered. I realized that the artifact I held was not isolated. It was part of a web of knowledge that spanned continents and generations. The significance of my father's work hit me fully. This was history, culture, science, and power interwoven, hidden away to protect it from exploitation, greed, and destruction. A shiver ran down my spine. I understood why he had left it to me, why he had trusted me alone to follow the path. I also understood the stakes. If this knowledge fell into the wrong hands, it could be used to manipulate, dominate, or destroy. The encounter in the tunnel was proof that others were aware, others were searching, and others might stop at nothing to claim it. My pulse raced, fear and determination entwined. As I realized that my father's final lesson was clear: trust myself, follow the path, protect the legacy, and above all, be vigilant. I carefully wrapped the artifact back in its velvet and secured it in my bag alongside the journal and relics. The chamber was silent again, though the energy lingered, almost palpable. Shadows flickered across the walls as if acknowledging my presence, and I felt the weight of history pressing down, urging me onward. My father's work, his dedication, his sacrifices, they were all tangible here, and now, the responsibility was mine. Rising to my feet, I traced the tunnels forward, guided by the maps, the symbols, and the notes. Each step carried me deeper into a story that spanned generations, each echo reminding me that I was not alone, that danger and discovery moved hand in hand, and that the next artifact, the next revelation, could change everything. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, I felt the full magnitude of what my father had entrusted to me, and the true value of the secrets hidden beneath the lake house. The tunnels seemed alive that night, breathing with a presence I could neither see nor fully comprehend. Each step I took echoed ominously against the stone walls, reminding me that I was walking into the unknown. The artifact I had uncovered in the previous chamber rested securely in my bag, along with the journal and relics, but the sense of being watched gnawed at my nerves. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the faint markings my father had left, spirals and symbols that had guided me this far, yet now they felt like a fragile lifeline in a space that could conceal anything. I followed the directions on the maps with painstaking care, descending into a section of the tunnels I had not yet explored. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying a faint metallic tang, as if the chamber ahead contained not just history, but danger. My fingers traced the walls, feeling for the etched clues my father had meticulously left, when suddenly, I heard it, a soft, deliberate movement behind me. My heart skipped a beat. Someone else was in the tunnels, Someone had followed me, shadowing my every move, and now they were close. I froze, listening. Footsteps echoed faintly, slow and measured, a predator testing the terrain before striking. Instinct kicked in. I pressed myself against the rough stone, clutching the metal key in one hand and the journal in the other, my mind racing for a plan. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to inject strength into my voice, though it trembled. There was no answer, only the sound of a faint whisper of air and shifting footsteps. The shadow moved closer, and a low, deliberate voice echoed, "You shouldn't have come here." "This isn't a game," my pulse hammered, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had prepared for discovery, for secrets, for artifacts, but I hadn't expected confrontation. I knew then that my father's warnings were not hypothetical. They were real, and the tunnels were not just a path to history, but a trap for the unprepared. I edged backward, keeping my flashlight trained on the advancing shadow. Every instinct screamed to run, but running in the narrow tunnels could be deadly. I needed strategy, not panic. The figure stepped into the light, tall and imposing, face hidden beneath a hood, movements deliberate and controlled. I recognized the intensity in their eyes, the same recognition I had seen once before, but this time it was sharper, more dangerous. "You don't understand what you're handling," they said, voice calm but threatening. "These artifacts, they're not just relics. They're power, knowledge. If you take another step, you risk everything." I swallowed hard, gripping the journal tighter, trying to steady my shaking hands. "I understand more than you think," I said, my voice firm despite the fear. "I'm following my father's path. He trusted me. That's enough." The figure paused, studying me, then moved aside with a deliberate grace, as if testing my resolve. I took the opening and pressed forward, my flashlight sweeping over another pedestal at the center of the chamber. On it rested an artifact unlike any I had encountered, a carved stone sphere, etched with intricate patterns that seemed to twist and shift as I moved, reflecting light in ways that made the shadows dance along the walls. My breath caught. This object radiated a presence I could feel in my bones, a combination of history, energy, and threat that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. As I approached the pedestal, the shadow lurked near the entrance, silent and watchful. I could feel tension coil in my chest like a spring, aware that any sudden movement could provoke a confrontation. I reached out to the artifact, tracing the patterns with my fingers, feeling the weight of generations, the careful preservation my father had ensured, and the danger that came with handling it. The figure remained still, silent, and yet the threat was palpable. I understood then that my father's secrets were not just hidden, they were protected, and that protection extended beyond the physical, into the very air of the tunnels. Carefully, I lifted the sphere, noting the symbols and comparing them with the maps and journal. Every pattern, every etching, seemed to resonate with the previous artifacts, forming a network of knowledge and power that was more profound than I had imagined. My father had not just preserved history. He had safeguarded a system of understanding, a legacy that connected past and present, danger and discovery, responsibility and revelation. And now it was mine to protect, even under the gaze of someone who might wish to take it from me. The figure shifted slightly, a subtle warning, but I ignored it, focusing on the artifact and my next steps. I secured it carefully in my bag, along with the journal and previous relics, aware that this chamber and its secrets could be claimed by someone else if I faltered. Every sense was heightened. The smell of earth, the chill in the air, the faint metallic tang, the distant drip of water echoing through the tunnels. Danger was real, immediate, and I was in the middle of it. But fear was also sharpened into focus and determination flared. I would follow my father's path, uncover the secrets, and protect the legacy. With the artifact secured, I edged toward the tunnel's exit, keeping the shadow in my peripheral vision. Each step was careful, deliberate, measured. I had survived the confrontation, but I knew the tunnels held more challenges, more revelations, and perhaps even greater threats. The journey was far from over, and the deeper I went, the more I understood that my father's trust had not been given lightly. I inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than ever, and stepped forward into the next passage, knowing that the real danger and the most extraordinary discoveries still awaited. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, far larger than any I had encountered. The walls lined with stone shelves, niches, and alcoves holding relics, maps, journals, and artifacts from centuries past. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of earth, stone, and something indefinably powerful, a mixture of history and intention that made my skin prickle. My flashlight illuminated the center of the chamber, revealing a pedestal that dwarfed all others, a massive stone structure carved with spirals, symbols, and inscriptions that pulsed faintly as though alive. I stepped closer, heart hammering, knowing that the moment my father had prepared me for had arrived. On the pedestal rested a single object, unlike any I had seen, a crystalline orb, clear but refracting light into infinite colors that danced across the cavern walls. The patterns within it shifted subtly as I moved, revealing spirals, rivers, and constellations that seemed to tell a story older than any living memory. My breath caught. This was the culmination of my father's work, the artifact he had protected at all costs, the centerpiece of the network of relics I had discovered. I could feel energy emanating from it, subtle but insistent, as though the orb itself recognized my presence. Beside the pedestal lay a journal, the last in my father's meticulous collection. I picked it up with reverence, the leather worn and soft, the pages filled with his careful looping handwriting. He had explained everything here, the network of artifacts, their purpose, their power, and the reason for secrecy. This chamber contained knowledge meant to be safeguarded, truths that could alter understanding of history, culture, and even science. And more importantly, it held instructions for me, his chosen successor, on how to protect it, understand it, and use it responsibly. As I read, a sense of awe and responsibility overwhelmed me. My father had spent his life preserving these secrets, not for wealth, not for fame, but for protection, for ensuring that dangerous knowledge did not fall into the wrong hands. Every challenge, every hidden passage, every coded symbol in the tunnels had been a test, a preparation for the person he trusted most, me. The weight of his trust pressed down, heavy and tangible, yet it was also a guide, a compass pointing me toward purpose and understanding. I turned toward the crystalline orb, hesitating for only a moment before placing my hands upon it. The energy surged subtly through my fingertips, connecting me to the spirals and patterns, to the legacy my father had safeguarded, to the network of secrets spanning centuries. The light shifted, revealing pathways in the patterns I had never seen before, showing me connections between artifacts, tunnels, and sites that were beyond imagination. It was as if the orb itself was alive, guiding me, teaching me, trusting me to continue the work. Then I heard a movement from the entrance, faint but deliberate. The shadow from the previous tunnels had returned, drawn to the power and significance of the artifact. I held my breath, heart hammering, knowing that this was the ultimate test, not of intellect, but of courage, resolve, and the willingness to protect what my father had entrusted to me. The figure stepped forward into the cavern, eyes wide with both recognition and desire. I stood firm, feeling the energy of the orb and the weight of my father's legacy empowering me. "You shouldn't have come this far," the figure warned, voice tight with urgency. "This knowledge, its power, can't belong to one person. You can't protect it alone." I shook my head, firm in my conviction. My father trusted me. That's enough. I will honor his legacy. I will protect this, whatever it takes. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between us, the cavern itself seeming to hold its breath. Then, almost imperceptibly, the figure nodded, understanding that this was not a battle of ownership, but a recognition of trust, responsibility, and courage. With the path clear, I carefully followed the instructions in the journal, securing the orb and other artifacts, documenting each pattern, each symbol, each connection. I realized that the ultimate secret my father had protected was not the artifacts themselves, but the responsibility, the knowledge, and the understanding that came with them, the ability to preserve history and protect it from exploitation. And in that realization, I felt a profound sense of purpose. As I emerged from the tunnels back into the farmhouse, The first light of dawn streaked across the lake, turning the water to molten gold. I looked back at the hidden entrances, the labyrinth below, and felt a deep, unshakable connection to my father and the legacy he had entrusted to me. The threats, the shadows, the challenges, they had all tested me, prepared me, and confirmed that I was ready. I had discovered the ultimate secret: face the dangers and embrace the responsibility. The house, the lake, the tunnels, they were no longer just places. They were the guardians of a legacy I now carried forward. I stepped outside, the crisp morning air filling my lungs, and for the first time in weeks, I felt truly alive, purposeful, and ready. The journey was complete, but the work had only begun. My father had trusted me with a secret that could change everything, and I would honor that trust, protect it, and ensure that the legacy beneath the lake house endured, safeguarded for generations to come. The shadows had tested me, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next, with the ultimate secret secure and my father's faith fulfilled.